Hello, and welcome to Budget Commander. On this channel, we'll discuss Magic the Gathering topics with a focus on playing Commander on a budget. We'll cover things like deck building, top cards, deck techs, and more. Let's get started. Hello friends, today we have a Momir Vig Simic Visionary deck tech for you. This is a budget deck tech, specifically 1DH, meaning all the cards in the deck are $1 or under, with the exception of the commander, who can be up to $5. Prices were checked as of the recording of this video using mtgstocks.com, so just note that prices do fluctuate, so they might be above or below where you see them at in this video. This is a +1/+1 counters deck, so the goal of this deck is to get out creatures and then make them bigger and swing for combat damage. Momir Vig is kind of a tutor on a creature. He's cost 5 and it's a 2/2 creature, so not great stats there. But it says whenever you cast a green creature spell, you may search your library for a creature card and reveal it. If you do, shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. Whenever you cast a blue creature spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put that card into your hand. So basically you stack these two triggers how they are on the card. You can fetch a creature out, put it on top, and then draw it. Essentially you want to play dual colored creatures, so green blue creature, to get the cast trigger each time. As always, we're going to start out by talking about Accelerants. These are the cards that help us get extra mana so we can get into our game plan. We already kind of talked about our game plan, get big creatures and make them even bigger. We also want to interfere with our opponent's game plan, so we'll talk about how to do that. And then cards that provide us consistency. Lastly, we'll talk about the lands or the mana base that's going to help us cast these spells. So, starting off with Accelerants, we have Sphere of the Suns, a 2-to-cast artifact that comes in tapped with 3 charge counters. We can tap it to remove a charge counter and add a mana of any color we want. Talisman of Curiosity comes in for 2 and it taps for colorless, but we can tap it for green blue, but it's going to deal 1 damage to us. Green or blue, sorry. Simic Cluestone also taps for green or blue. It's a 3-to-cast artifact. We can also pay a green or blue and sacrifice it to draw a card. We have Simic Locket, very similar. Comes in for 3, taps for green or blue. We can pay 4 in any combination of green or blue and sacrifice it. This time we get to draw 2 cards. New Horizons is an enchantment aura that we put on a land, and it allows us to tap that land for 2 mana of any one color. And also when that aura enters, we can put a +1/+1 counter on one of our creatures. Ronus's Monument is a cost reducer, making all of our green spells cost 1 colorless less. And then whenever we cast a creature, we can give one of our creatures +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. We have Gyre Engineer, who taps for green blue. And then we have Rishkar Pima Renegade, a 3-to-cast creature, and when it enters, we can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, so including himself. And then each of those creatures, or each of the creatures we control that has a +1/+1 counter, can tap for a green mana. So great ramp there, can even make all of our creatures dorks, which is great. Zhang Yangu Wildcrafter says each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter has add 1 mana of any color, so similar to Rishkar, and it has the -1 ability to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Comes in with 3 loyalty, so you're not going to get a lot of hits off of it, but you will get to put some +1/+1 counters out, and you also get to make other creatures mana dorks, which is great. Farseek allows us to put an island onto the battlefield tapped. Rampant Growth allows us to get a forest or an island on the battlefield tapped. And then Peregrine Drake is more of a tempo card, because when we play it, when it enters, we get to untap 5 of our lands. We do have a couple lands that tap for 2 colors, so we could actually gain a mana out of it, or even 2 mana, but mostly it's just a tempo card. We're going to get a 2/3 flyer and then get to cast it. Maybe we cast Momir Vig after that. Or maybe you cast it before, sorry. Cloudfin Raptor is a 1-to-cast flyer, and this is where we start getting into our +1/+1 counters. He's got Evolve, which a few creatures have. Evolve is whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control. if it has greater power or toughness than this creature, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So as long as you play a 1/1, Cloudfin Raptor is going to grow because a creature with greater power entered the battlefield. Plaxcaster Frogling helps us get +1/+1 counters on creatures that enter after him. He comes in as 0/0 with 3 +1/+1 counters, and then whenever another creature enters, we can move counters from the Plaxcaster Frogling to that new creature. We can also pay 2 and protect creatures that we have with +1/+1 counters by giving that creature Shroud. Elusive Crassus is a 0/4 with the Evolve that has unblockable. So once you get a 1/1 counter on this, or you find ways to double your counters, you can get a huge unblockable creature. Mowu Loyal Companion is a 4-cast 3/3 with Trample and Vigilance, and anytime you would put a +1/+1 counter on him, you get to put an additional +1/+1 counter on Mowu as well. So give it a 1/1 counter from Plaxcaster Frogling, it actually is going to get 2. Great. Cytoplast Rootkin is a 4-cast 0/0 that comes in with 4 +1/+1 counters. It also has that graft like the Frogling. And then whenever Cytoplast Rootkin enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter. So it's going to give extra counters to your other creatures. Then you can also pay 2 to move +1/+1 counters from a creature onto the Cytoplast Rootkin. So essentially, you can move counters around in combat, make him big enough to survive the combat, or perhaps trade. Trollbeard Guardian is another one that kind of helps our whole team. Each creature that has a +1/+1 counter gets Trample. It's a 5/5 for 5, so fair deal there. It comes in and it has Adapt 3, so pay 2 and a green, and then you get to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, as long as the troll doesn't have a +1/+1 counter already. Also, the art on that card is really cool. Skatewing Spy is similar, but instead of giving Trample, he's going to give Flying to all our creatures with +1/+1. He also has Adapt 2, but it costs 6 to give him his Adapt. Galloping Lizrog is a 5-cast 3/3. When it enters, you can remove any number of +1 counters from your creatures, and if you do, you get to put twice that many on the Lizrog. It has Trample, so you could essentially get a huge Trampler if you just take a few counters away from some of your other creatures. Oran Reef Hydra is a 6-cast 5/5 Trampler with Landfall. Whenever you put a land onto the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter. If that land is a forest, you can give the Hydra 2 +1/+1 counters. Nimbus Swimmer costs a green and a blue, and then you can pay X. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. It's a 0/0, so say you pay 5 for X, you get a 5/5 flyer, which is not too bad of a deal. It also has both colors, so you can trigger Momir Vig with it. Miming Slime is a 3-cast sorcery that gives you a token with power and toughness equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. And then Simic Sky Swallower is just a great card. A 6/6 flying trampler with Shroud. Not bad to play right after a board wipe. Can cause a lot of problems for people. Merfolk Skydiver is really good because it has this proliferate ability. It's a 1/1 for Simic colors. It's a flyer, and it says whenever Skydiver enters the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and then you can pay 5 to proliferate. Proliferate means you can choose any number of permanents or players and give each another counter of each kind already there. Evolution Sage is another way to proliferate. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to proliferate, and it's a 3/2 creature that costs 3. Varel the Whole Clade is another way to add counters. He says pay green and blue, tap him, double the number of each kind of counter on target artifact, creature, or land. He's a 1/4 for 3, so kind of harder to get rid of because he's got a bigger butt. And then you can also use him for combat tricks, swing in with 2 creatures and knowing that, oh, I'm going to be able to double the counters on one of them. Feels good. You can do the same thing defensively. Burst of Strength is just another way to get +1/+1 counters on your creatures. You also get to untap that creature, so it kind of gives you vigilance for the turn, or pseudo vigilance. Your opponents don't even get to know about it. Song of Freyalise helps to ramp us, but also give all of our creatures +1/+1 counters. This is one of the Saga enchantments, so the first turn it enters, it's going to make it so all of your creatures can tap to add a mana of any color. The second turn you have this on the table, the same ability applies, and then by the third turn you've had this on the table, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, and then those creatures get Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn. Vigilance and Indestructible and Trample are all great keywords to have for a turn. So even if you play this on turn 2 and get a creature out the following turn, it's not bad, but the more creatures you have out, the better. Hard thing is your opponents see this coming, so they can usually play around it a little bit. Simic Ascendancy is kind of a secondary win condition. It's a 2 to cast enchantment that allows you to pay 3 to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature we control, we can put a growth counter on Simic Ascendancy. And then if at the beginning of our upkeep we have growth count 20 or more growth counters, we win the game. Well, with all the ways we can proliferate or double with Vorel, very quickly we could get 20 growth counters and just win the game. Otherwise, it's just nice to have a way to sink mana into giving +1/+1 counters to our creatures. Retreat to Kanzandu is a 3 to cast enchantment with landfall. We can choose one of two modes. The option 1 is what we're mostly going to do, which is put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, but we might also choose to gain 2 life, just kind of depends on the situation. Usually you're going to stick with mode number 1. Biogenic Upgrade is a 6 to cast sorcery, and it says distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures, and then double the number of +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. Altered Ego is a 4 to cast clone. Can't be countered, which is nice, but you can pay X, and then that clone enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. So if you paid 7 for this clone, it enters as whatever you choose it to be, and then you get to have an additional 3 +1/+1 counters. We're going to protect our creatures by blinking them with Essence Flux. It says exile target creature you control and then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So if they steal our stuff, we can take it back. Otherwise, if they're targeting our things, we can just blink them so they can't take them or destroy them in the first place, which is great. If we had spirits, we would also get +1/+1 counters. We don't actually have any spirits, so we're just using it for that blink ability. Simic Charm is one of those cards that has 3 different modes. We get to choose between giving a creature +3/+3, giving something of ours hexproof, which is probably what we're going to do to protect our own things, or we can return target creature to its owner's hand. So one of our own or an opponent's. A lot of versatility there. We're going to interfere with our opponent's plans by casting cards like Reality Shift. This is going to allow us to exile target creature, and then its controller gets to manifest the top card of their library. Essence Capture is a counterspell specific to creatures. We cast it, we get a counter target creature spell, and then put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 creature we control. Applied Biomancy is another one of those multi-use cards. The 2 different modes you can choose are target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, or return target creature to its owner's hand. Nature's Claim allows us to get rid of artifacts or enchantments. The controller is going to gain 4 life. Trigon Predator is a 3 to cast 2/3 flyer that says whenever it deals damage to a player, we get to destroy an artifact or enchantment that player controls. It's kind of hard because you have to be able to connect with it, but it does have flying, which gives you some options as far as evasion. Especially nice if you can get +1/+1 counters on it and start proliferating those or doubling them. Acidic Slime is another one, a 2/2 Death Toucher, and when it enters we can get rid of artifact, enchantment, or land. We also have the Frilled Mystic, which is a 3/2 flash creature that when it enters we get to counter a spell. And then Incubation Incongruity. Incongruity is probably where we're going to go. It says exile target creature. That creature's controller creates a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token. But we could also use it to look at the top 5 cards of our library reveal a creature card from among them and put it into our hand, and then the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. Cards that are going to provide us consistency. We have Brainstorm, which allows us to draw 3 cards, put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library. So we're going to net 1, although we did play a card to get it. But it helps us with a little card selection because we can get rid of some of the cards we don't need in our hand at that moment. Growth Spiral and Coiling Oracle are going to allow us to possibly get extra lands to the battlefield, but we also get to draw cards off of them potentially as well. Simic Guildmage will allow us to draw cards by removing +1/+1 counters from our creatures. We can also make it so that creatures enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counters this turn. Divination, classic draw spell, pay 3, draw 2. Inspiring Call, a great way to protect our team. It says draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter. So fill up our hand depending on how big our board is. And we can give those creatures indestructible until end of turn. It's instant speed, so a great way to protect our team from board wipes. And then we get to also draw a bunch of cards off of it, so it can really put us into good position depending on when we use this card. Kiora Behemoth Beckoner is a 3 to cast Planeswalker, comes in with 7 loyalty counters. It only has a -1 ability, which says we can untap a permanent, so possibly ramp us or give a creature vigilance or allow a creature to tap with a tap ability. But it also says whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. Bred for the Hunt allows us to draw a card anytime one of our creatures deals damage to a player, as long as it had a +1/+1 counter. Zagana Utopia Speaker is a 4 to cast 4/4, and when it enters, if another creature we control has a +1/+1 counter, we get a draw card. It also has Adapt 4, so we can pay 6 to give Zagana 4 +1/+1 counters. And then each of the creatures we control with a +1/+1 counter has Trample. So a lot going on with Zagana that helps our deck. Counters, drawing cards, Trample for all of our counter creatures. It's really nice. Bounty of the Luxa is a 4 to cast enchantment, and it's going to alternate what it does every turn. The first turn it's on the battlefield, you're going to get to draw a card off of it. The next turn it's on the battlefield, you get to add 3 mana to your mana pool, I believe at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. Yes. So your first main phase, you get an extra 3 mana. So it alternates between drawing you cards and ramping you a little bit. Fathom Mage is a 4 to cast 1/1 with Evolve, and then each time the Fathom Mage gets a +1/+1 counter, we get to draw a card. Urban Evolution allows us to draw 3 cards, and we get to play an extra land off of it. We have the Noheven Sages, which come in as a 0/0 with 4 +1/+1 counters, and then we can pay 1 and remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures we control, so any creatures, and that'll allow us to draw a card. Then we have Momir Vig, obviously, who we can use to tutor up cards we want from our deck. I recommend getting multicolored cards. We have a lot of those in here. Actually, if I was to play this, I'm not a big fan of tutoring, and so how I would play it is just go from the bottom of my deck until I hit a dual colored card, and then shuffle up, put that dual colored card on top, no matter what it was. Of course, obviously that's not the best way or most strategic way to play it, but I think it's the most fun and will give you a little bit of randomness to how the deck plays. You also have Arcanus the Omnipotent, so if you don't have your other draws going on, this guy just sits out there and he'll draw you 3 cards a turn, as long as nobody can remove him. He is a little bit harder to remove as long as you have the mana to pay for to return him to your hand, but that makes him really, really slow. So great draw if your opponents can't deal with him. Then we'll get into the lands. We have Gateway Plaza, Simic Guildgate, and Lumbering Falls, which can all tap for green-blue. The Lumbering Falls can also turn into a 3/3 lizard with hexproof. Oh, sorry, not lizard. It's a elemental creature with hexproof until end of turn. We have Simic Growth Chamber, Thornwood Falls, which give us green-blue, Skyshroud Forest, which gives us green-blue, but it is going to deal 1 damage to us to give us one of those colors. So it can help us fix early game, and then we can just use it for a colorless once we get to the mid and late game. Bant Panorama is going to allow us to... Bant Panorama, Blighted Woodland, and Evolving Wilds are going to allow us to fetch for either an island or plains, or 2 in the case of Blighted Woodland. Bant Panorama and the Blighted Woodland also enter and can tap for a colorless. Terramorphic Expanse, just like Evolving Wilds, can fetch us an island or a forest. Blighted Cataract taps for a colorless, or we can pay 6 to draw 2 cards off of it. Palomar Depths enters tapped and can tap for a blue, but allows us to fix the top 3 cards of our deck, smoothing out our draws. We also have the Noheven Heart of Progress, which allows us to put +1/+1 counters on each creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Guildmage's Form allows us to add a mana of any color, and if we spend that mana on a multicolored creature spell, that creature is going to enter with a +1/+1 counter. Opal Palace allows us to have Momir Vig enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counters, and all of these can tap for a colorless if we want them to. Rogue's Passage makes one of our creatures unblockable or taps for a colorless. Then we have Temple of the False God, which can tap for 2 colorless as long as we own 5 or more lands. We are going to run 12 forests and 11 islands in this deck. So quite a few basics, which is nice because it helps with the speed. Another thing that helps with the speed is having a lower end average CMC, 3.22 is on the lower end in my opinion. As you can see there's the mana curve. Kind of a 3-drop heavy, but going to play out pretty smooth. If you like the idea of getting your creatures really big with +1/+1 counters, multiplying those +1/+1 counters, give this deck a go. Let me know what you think of it. Otherwise, let me know which commander you'd like to see next. This Momir Vig deck was a recommendation from one of the viewers. So if you have an idea of which deck you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed this video and have a great rest of your day. Peace. Thanks for watching. You can help support this channel by hitting that subscribe button. This will help keep you up to date on content from Budget Commander. If you liked the video, make sure you like the video. Leave me a comment with your thoughts on this topic. And if you think someone else could benefit from this video, feel free to share. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk with you next time.